This is Laura London, and you're listening to Speaking of Jung. For this, the third episode of the podcast, I spoke via the magic of Skype with Jungian analyst and author Frith Luton. Frith holds a Bachelor of Arts honors and a Diploma of Education from the University of Melbourne, a Master of Analytical Psychology from the University of Western Sydney, a Diploma in Applied Astrology from Astro in Australia, a Graduate Diploma in Editing and Publishing from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, and a Diploma in Analytical Psychology, which is the Diploma of a Jungian Analyst, from the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology according to C.G. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz in Zürich. She has presented a series of lectures to trainee analysts at the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology and at the International School of Analytical Psychology. She has also lectured at the Psychology Club of Zürich and at the C.G. Jung Societies of Brisbane, Canberra, Melbourne, South Australia, and Sydney. Frith is currently in private practice in Melbourne, Australia, and is also a professional astrologer, available for both consultations and supervision. In addition, she has been a long-time professional book editor, having worked closely with Daryl Sharp, editing titles for Inner City Books. She is the author of Bees, Honey, and the Hive, Circumambulating the Center, a Jungian exploration of the symbolism in psychology, published by Inner City Books in 2011. Here's the interview. I was looking at your website, frithluton.com, and on it, you have a lot of interesting information about Jungian analysis.
Yes, and a lot of that is thanks to Daryl Sharp and his generous offer that I could quote from his C.G. Jung lexicon. And also my husband has taken some wonderful photos and created some very interesting artifacts there.
Yeah, I did notice that there are a lot of photographs of you in different parts of the world. You spent time in Europe, in Morocco, and northern Norway. You spent 3 months trekking in Nepal, a month in Thailand, 2 trips to Burma, and after that, another month in Greece and 3 months in Turkey. Frith, what were you doing?
I love travelling, and there's more to add to that list because I've been back and forward from Zurich and Australia many, many times, and recently I fulfilled a lifelong passion and went to Iceland, which is a mythic, wonderful country, and that was a dream come true. My grandfather was from Manchester in England, and my mother spoke fluent French and German, and I think I'm quite European in my loves and passions, and I also was a travel editor at Lonely Planet Publications, editing travel guidebooks for over 8 years. So I just love the broader horizons. And
about Nepal, you mentioned that being there and also your experience of the death of some close loved ones opened up, as Jung calls it, thinking with the heart. What is thinking with the heart?
I think it is a combination of what Jung would call logos and eros, and this deep relatedness to the humanity in us that is so important and so healing. It's not just the sky god logos. And thinking with the heart really led me to the work on the bees. So it is a combination of above and below, sky and earth, that meet in the middle, so we can have a good combination of thinking and feeling and not lose our humanity, which is our heart, which is also courage and authenticity, and really, as a Jungian analyst, helping that come out in others is really what I was drawn to, I think.
You wrote, respecting the wisdom of dreams is the red thread. And that's a significant part of your training as an analyst, is to stay true to the demanding life's work of pondering the meaning and amplifying the images and symbols of your own dreams, as well as in the dreams of your analysans who entrust their inner life to you in your dialogues and work together. Mm-hmm. What is the red thread?
I think the Swiss taught me that expression. It is the connection, and it's like the living, flowing stone, the redness, the life force, a thread joins things and flows. So it's the connection that's alive. And, the red book is a red thread as well from Jung's original experiences, direct experiences, to his psychology that took years to develop out of that direct experience.
You mention in your book that as a Jungian analyst, you work with the symbolic life and with the archetypal images that come up from the depths of the unconscious to consciousness, for example, through dreams.
Mm.
Would you say a few words about that?
Yes, the symbols are very important because Jung said that they are the best expressions of something that's unknown within us. We have our kind of hot spots, the things that we react to, the complexes where we can react in an autonomous way without really refining what we're going to say or do. It just comes out like stepping on a landmine. But symbols give us a bridge to understanding and working out our own meaning. And, the Delphic maxim of know thyself and nothing in excess is what we're trying to achieve, I think, on this kind of inner reflection and quest.
On your website, you say that today many psychologically healthy individuals are discovering the depths of their own psyche through engaging with the messages from their own unconscious brought to light by their dreams. That really struck me because I didn't enter analysis because I was mentally ill. It was because I was clashing with the outside world and I wanted to know why, and I didn't know what to do about it. And it seemed that nobody around me had the answers, and I had to go looking for what made sense to me. And that was, as you call it, the profound insights of C.G. Jung.
Mm.
What made you want to become an analyst?
I had some very strong dreams that were archetypal after the death of my stepfather, the one who was a beekeeper, for those that have read the book. And I started looking at classical mythology and I thought, this is wonderful. It really helps me understand the grief and gives me points me in a direction. It shows where the psychic energy is going. And I started reading some Jungian work and was particularly drawn to Jung and von Franz, but also Robert Johnson's He, She and We, and I just adored reading that. I'd been a great reader of fiction and I was working in the publishing industry in the 1980s, and I just thought, this is amazing. And I was also very much interested in the symbolic right from childhood and had this thirst for self-understanding and questing, and it vivified me. It made me feel the joy of life and understanding. And so it took me a long time to get to Zurich. I went there in 2000 first for a summer intensive, and I think that my inner life, my dreams, those symbols built bridges towards the work. But I also was an astrologer, and that wasn't enough for me because I really wanted to go deeper into the individual work. And Jung says the main interest of his work isn't, to kind of semi-quote him, it is not concerned with the treatment of neurosis, but rather with the approach to the numinous, which is the real therapy. So that's the kind of living psyche, the kind of links between psyche and matter, between nature and our inner depths and meaning. So he said man needs to become his complete self to live whole, or mankind, men and women. God needs man to mirror his creation and help it evolve, and the whole human being is open to the divine as co-creator. So there's this kind of religious instinct that is in, and spirituality and comparative mythology and religion that's very much necessary, he thinks, besides the psychiatry and psychopathology for an analyst in their work, and of course their own personal training analysis, which is the quintessence of the whole training and makes it different from any other kind of therapy.
It's rigorous training. It's not just getting a postgraduate degree. It involves a personal analysis. Hundreds
of hours and hundreds of hours of casework, and also writing something that comes out of that. And that's my B work started as my creative thesis at the end of my training. But I remember when I was being interviewed there's a very rigorous selection process, and I was being interviewed in Zürich, the Jung Institute, and I was asked what's the heart of the training, and I said the analysis, because really Jung says in Memories, Dreams and Reflections that the analyst can only accompany the analyse on into the work as far as he or she has gone themselves. So if you stay in your persona in a analytic encounter and not do the shadow work and not look at your own complexes and what triggers you, then it's going to come out somewhere. You may fly through your training, but then something will bring you to your knees later on. There's no training. Some of the more senior people said in Zurich that doesn't bring you to your knees and make you suffer in some way, but there's joy as well. And this is the opposites. You know, in my book I say, where there's honey, there's gall, quoting one of the famous classical quotes. And this both and, it's really important in astrology, and it's really important in Jung's approach to understanding ourselves or to our psyche.
The both and. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, I suppose it's this sense that there's living paradox and mystery. I have people that come to me who haven't read much real Jung, and they would like me to kind of fix them and nail down the meaning of a dream and give them some show bag or commodity to leave with. And until that person is prepared to work and suffer and come alive within themselves to a kind of walking the path of their own symbolism, then they're probably not ready.
I'm glad that you mentioned the suffering, because I think that if you were to tell people at the beginning of analysis that it was going to involve a lot of suffering, I don't think they'd do it. It would be a lot easier to just take a pill.
Yeah, and the suffering comes through trying to understand what one doesn't know about oneself, one's shadow. And, you know, if someone shines the light of consciousness or talks about a dream image that doesn't sit nicely with one's sanitized view of oneself, then it can be like an explosion. So we have to tread carefully. There is that kairos, that timing that's respectful to the stage at which that other person that you're sitting with is, and usually something comes between the analyse on and the analyst and the work that they do together that Jung calls a transcendent function. The third thing that arises from knowing more about how we can live. Jung actually said of himself, I am the clash of opposites. And throughout a long life, Claire Dunn says this in her book, Wounded Healer of the Soul, throughout a long life he learned to live and reconcile the polarities into a unity of wholeness at 84, he said about that long trek, and I'll just read you a little quote that I like. The journey from cloud cuckoo land to reality lasted a long time. In my case, Pilgrim's Progress consisted in my having to climb down 1,000 ladders until I could reach out my hand to the little clod of earth that I am. So, you know, it's not about being mothered or held or never-ending compassion. It's about being able to stand in the fire oneself and not blame the analyst or the parental figure for not getting it or whatever. If something doesn't click in a session, you have to come back and say, look, I felt that didn't quite hit the spot. Can we talk about this more? Can we explore it more? But that requires patience and humility and reflection and a red thread between one session to the next. You don't just be in this process for 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week. It's quite a commitment, and that doesn't really fit with some of the busyness of the modern narcissistic entitled life. Not that I'm judging, but there is this kind of demanding kind of animus-ridden behaviour that can get shipwrecked if we're not prepared to look at our more shadowy, unrefined sides, rough edges we call them in Australia. We have to polish to get our gold out of the dark, and actually, and that's why I chose the bees, because their honey-making process is has parallels to what we go through to really have this sense of inner unity that Jung calls the self. And it does kind of bridge the conscious and the unconscious. And so there's always something unconscious that we can't appropriate to consciousness, and we have to live with that. We're not all-knowing, all-powerful gods or goddesses. That would be inflated and hubris-inspiring.
You mentioned in your book about the bees that too much honey led to the dark side of the sweetness. Do you equate that to too much sweetness and light even in a relationship? Too much positivity. People are forcing themselves to be nice to each other. This positive thinking attitude that's out there. Do you believe that constellates the opposite?
Well, in a lot of, I think we call it Pollyannaism, where, you know, everything's wonderful, and we don't live in springtime all the time. We have to go through winter in order to see the new spring, and in alchemy it's like the new sun or the new sunrise, aurora convergence. If we're wanting the sweet things and the things that are palatable, that taste good and that are easy and pleasing to our egos, and giving us strokes and positive feedback all the time, then when we have the first bit of criticism, maybe in a new job or in a new marriage or relationship, there'll be this outrage complex that comes up and says, I'm out of here, I can't tolerate this, don't speak to me like that, I deserve the world and you're not giving it to me. So, that can be too much of the good thing. But also if we are in a honeymoon period or just in the honey, then often that loads up one side of the polarity between sweetness and bitterness, or war and peace, or sting and honey making, and then the scales can tip to the other side. And I think as an astrologer, that balancing the opposites and trying to find that transcendent function that's the Buddhists call the middle path, or the Taoists call the way, or Jung calls the self. That's this balancing act of recognising a paradox that can include both but not all one and not the other. But you do, of course, if you sting and snipe or express rage, you're losing something of your balance. And that's why the Franz's article on the transformed Berserker is really central to my book. But it is like recognising the really dark things in the world can help us reach a situation where there's a sense that there might be meaning in this. One book that I recommend to people that are not just starting out reading Jungian works because it might be too much of a shock, but Edward Edinger's archetype of the apocalypse is quite interesting behind it, and it's also in the transformed Berserker vision. Behind this deep eros that develops, first there has to be a recognition of all the very dark things in a way.
You mentioned the transformed Berserker, that he does not express blind, destructive, undifferentiated anger and rage, but rather, now this is the transformed Berserker, but rather a divine fighting spirit or way of protecting and bringing balance to what is warring or in opposition in the collective.
Yes, this transformed Berserker refers to a vision of Nicholas von Flue, who became like a wise sage in Swiss life several centuries ago, and a saint in a way. He was a soldier and he withdrew, and his family lived in a farmhouse. It's still there, and he sat in a meditative state like some of the Buddhist monks with very little food and so on. People came for healing. But he had a lot of visions, and one was him out on the path walking, and there are these wonderful subalpine walking paths in Switzerland, and he met a pilgrim wearing the wayfarer's hat and cloak, and of course a wayfarer is symbolic of someone on a pilgrimage touching the earth and going on it's usually a spiritual journey, like walking the Camino in Spain. And there's this encounter, and it's religious. There's a Christian hallelujah sound, and then there's this bodily recognition that transforms you. You then see a Wotanic figure who's a god of the storm, and also the shamanic union of opposites between heaven and earth, the living and the dead. Then these two men look at each other, and the eye contact and the kind of eros, the link and feeling between the two is very intense. And then this transformation, it's like a glinting bearskin. The Berserker was actually the bear human overlay or composite symbols, so that the noble warrior would be sitting at home and there'd be a battle, and so somehow he'd be there. It's almost like journeying in the shamanic sense, be there amongst it, but still be this balanced, dignified human that was firmly in the society, but was in touch with the raging bear side. And so this intense meeting on the path, it was as if honey was flowing when the transformation happened, and it was this deep eros or love of a human kind. It wasn't, it was something big that could then have a transformative effect on not just the local surroundings, but heal much bigger problems and wars and so on. And that's very alchemical, because we do our work in a very private analytical space. Jung saw the parallels between the psychological development and understanding within an individual doing this depth psychological work. And in alchemy, the transformation happens in this closed vessel, just like the honey making happens in a closed beehive, the bees flapping their wings and keeping the uncured honey that's being transformed into the golden flowing substance. The Arabic alchemists call it the stone, actually, honey. And so when it reaches a certain stage, when we haven't got warring opposites tearing us apart, because we all know what happens when we lose our centre or our composure, when we've got something that's really like a neurotic thorn in the side that won't let us rest and tears us apart, then we can't really be so effective in creating a harmonious effect in our environment. And so at some stage, when we've done our inner work and our creative paying attention to our symbolic life, Jung and Franz both talk about this libido end stage, and it's represented by a phoenix, the symbol of rebirth in some of the alchemical drawings. The vessel can be opened and the contents won't just spew out and scatter in an autonomous complex rage or something like that. It'll be more healing in its effect and more unifying. So I think we could do with a big dose of that in the world right now. And just one other thing, that the beehive with the queen at the centre, that they have this natural way of task differentiation at different ages, and also with the bees, and also with different external conditions like different blossoms flowering or different amounts of sunshine and temperature. And so it's like the self-regulation of the psyche, and this numinous queen that just lays and lays is there. And it's called a eusocial system. So, for the benefit of the whole organism in a way. It's indestructible in its life force. Zoe, I talk about this in the book, the indestructibility of life. And some of the latest researchers in your state of Illinois have found some wonderful things from decoding the honeybee genome and other research that are really making the links between the alchemical individuation process even more exciting than what I describe in the book.
One of the other mentions of the alchemical work in your book is how the psychological individuation process involves hard work and daily routine, as in the stage of alchemy called women washing, with its images of women doing the laundry.
Yes.
And this really caught my attention because I often find myself complaining about how I have to do the same tasks every day. I have to wash the dishes, do the laundry, tidy up the house, take out the garbage. I mean, even bathe, right? We have to do those things every day. And sometimes I get so frustrated because I just want to work. I just want to read. I just want to sit and do my creative work. And all of these everyday, seemingly menial tasks kind of get in the way. And when I read this section of your book, it all made sense to me. Why all this constant cleaning? Tell us what you said about it in the book.
Oh, okay. I was going to tell you something else about it. But,
please do. Go ahead.
It's very interesting. I don't know whether you got on board with this New York Times bestseller that just came out with Marie Kondo about the joy of tidying, and if items in your house don't bring you joy, then you throw them out. I recommend it. A lot of Americans rushed out and bought it, and it just was a #1 New York Times bestseller. With these kind of mundane daily round routines, if they're not excessive in our lives, these routine chores can be done with a kind of meditative recollection and, recentering, I suppose, and they can free us to become aware of thoughts and feelings that we're mostly too busy to kind of give time and space to. And it just helps a different kind of consciousness, making unconscious thoughts and feelings conscious. We can think about what sparked us or made us fall into a complex in a certain situation. It's processing time, I think.
Yes.
And we can also become more centred in attending to and caring for our life environment, keeping it kind of clean and beautiful, etc. And, you know, if you come home to an absolutely messy house and all the dishes not clean in the kitchen and so on, it's more difficult to get to those creative, passionate things. But I say that I quoted von Franz in her lectures on alchemy in the book, and there's some I've put in a footnote that recommending the book by Joseph Henderson and Diane Sherwood, The Transformation of the Psyche, the Splendor Solis, symbolic alchemy of the Splendor Solis. A lot of people love that because it's got the alchemical pictures in colour, and there is one of the women washing stage with the sheets out everywhere. I might be a bit prejudiced because I used to line up all my teddy bears and toys and with my sister and put on a big waterproof apron and have the old metal bathtub and we do washing. And now if I travel and come home here, I still hand wash and put things out on the clothesline in the air. Most people have electric dryers in the north, but we don't have a really cold winter here, so we can do that. And it's a meditation for me. It's a regrounding and landing process. But von Franz lectured on alchemy, and Daryl Sharp and Inner City Books have got that wonderful green book on alchemy by von Franz. I recommend that to everyone. She said, in alchemical literature, it's generally said the great effort and trouble continues from the negredo, that's the black stage, to the albedo, that's the white stage when consciousness comes in. That is said to be the hard part, and afterwards everything becomes easier. The negredo, the blackness, the terrible depression and state of dissolution, like falling apart, has to be compensated by the hard work of the alchemist, or that's us in analysis. And that hard work consists, amongst other things, in constant washing. Therefore, even the work of washerwomen's often mentioned in the text. You know, it's doing that, the Zen Buddhist thing, chop that wood, carry water. You know, sometimes you do get really impatient. Oh, I wish I didn't have to cook the meal and sweep the leaves and do this and do that. In Switzerland, they're much more emphatic about, you know, ringing the Gemeindehaus or even the police if things are a bit out of place. But part of this archetype of order, I suppose, and purification rituals, the washing, and we often have dreams where we're in the shower or in the alchemical bath, and so we're prepared to loosen the dirt and go through a process that involves loosening up and cleansing, I suppose, and that helps transformation process, and an inner kind of daily commitment is necessary. And I've got this beautiful quote from Rilke that someone gave me after I'd done the book, and it's his letter to a Polish translator from 1925. He says, "We are the bees of the invisible world," so we humans. And I think this is really central, Laura, to what my main reasons for doing this work. We're the bees of the invisible world. We perpetually gather the honey of the visible world in order to store it in the great golden hive of the invisible one. So we're kind of renewing something that's really to do with that kind of spiritual enduring sense of meaning that Jung calls itself, that can renew us day after day in the most simple, grounded ways. And von Franz says it's really, really important for an analyst not to go stale. She's got this wonderful kind of tip, I suppose, about you have to be working on your own creative project, and for her that was writing and lectures, in order to take care of that hungry, creative side, so that it doesn't become, you know, a matter of power issues in groups and things like that. And Jung's wonderful quote about where love reigns, there's no will to power, and where the will to power is paramount, love is lacking. The one is but the shadow of the other. That's from Collected Work 7, paragraph 78. That is the key to the whole thing as far as I'm concerned, and that was central in my work on the bees.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I noticed that quote in your book on page 121, and that seems to be a very popular Jungian quote. Yeah, I see that a lot, and I usually only see part of it, not the whole thing.
Yes, that's right, and often the hard bits are left out, the ones that involve difficulty.
Mm-hmm. That the one is but the shadow of the other. The man who adopts the standpoint of Eros finds his compensatory opposite in the will to power, and that of the man who puts the accent on power is Eros.
Mysterium Conjunctionis, which is Jung's final work on alchemy, is my favourite book of the collected works, and really this book, Bees, Honey and the Hive, is based on my love of that. Plus, I was a beekeeper. I had 150 beehives with my stepfather, and so I really love the bees from that point of view. But Jung in that Mysterium Conjunctionis talks about the honey and has this beautiful quote from Paracelsus, in the honey, the sweetness of earths, we can easily recognise the balsam of life that permeates all living, budding and growing things. So it's this kind of flow. It expresses psychologically the joy of life and the life urge, and that's kind of the red again, which overcome and eliminate everything dark and inhibiting. Where spring-like joy and expectation reign, spirit can embrace nature and nature's spirit. So that's paragraph 698. So that's in the bee symbolism, there is this link with the sky gods and the sun, and also the great mother in the kind of ancient Greek and Cretan mother goddess. The priestesses are called bees, Melissa. And there's this place in the middle where the combination of lunar and solar, masculine, feminine, and the eros and logos, or spirit and matter, meet. And that's where, according to mythology, the bee comes into the picture. And so it's a wonderful symbolism associated with the bee and the honey and the hive. And it's got everything to do with why our life has got joy and springtime energy and love and passion. But there is a sting, and we do war.
Another symbol tied to the bees that we haven't touched on is the actual beehive itself being, yes, an emblem of industry. Now, that's not the same industry as our current day industry. What are the differences, and where did we, with the way we do industry, where did we kind of go wrong?
I think we lost our soul, but the industry, that's coming from centuries ago. It's the actual focus on, well, in the modern day we'd say focus on task. So industry is focused in the beehive, and it's actually every day when the sun rises, the bees, if it's over 17 degrees centigrade, we don't do Fahrenheit here anymore, we used to, then they can fly, and they will. And they won't say, I'm going to do nothing today, I'm going to be a couch potato, I'm going to watch television, I'm going to be online all day. That they go out and find what they can bring back of nourishment to actually keep that whole system going. And the queen is really a queen that's the centre of it. But it's not mindless losing a sense of what it's all for. The bees have got a dance language. They communicate where the hive is by waggling or circling, or even they've just found out having stop signals when that source is no longer viable. And Jung and von Franz both write about this, as well as Carl von Frisch and some of the more modern scientists, that there's actually some kind of language and unity in multiplicity going on, and it's not kind of artificial teamwork and just staying at the office till you've done a 12-hour day and then you have to log on, if you're Australian, to the New York time and stay up all night. I know lots of corporate people that are virtually dying at work in a way and losing their joie de vivre, losing their honey, losing their it's desiccation. The water of life has gone, like in some of the fairy tales, and that's a very serious loss of soul, I suppose you'd call it.
You mentioned the social or collective responsibility that the bees exhibit. I've been talking about that with some people about, do we live for ourselves and our families, or do we live for the community? And what I tend to see is people are pretty much just focused on themselves. Maybe themselves, their spouse, their kids, maybe their close friends and family, and they really couldn't care less about anybody else. I was thinking about that a lot when I was reading about the bees and their collective responsibility to each other, to the hive. Was I reading that right?
Yeah, it's very complex system, and there's some wonderful new research, but then making it akin to the human brain, the way it works. But you're also right about this narcissistic ruthlessness that some people display, and you'll have a man pushing a baby in a baby chair, or a pusher we call them, in the restaurant, and nearly knock a woman off her chair and not say, look, I'm really sorry. He'll turn to the child that's his and say, you're right, mate. And the poor woman might have had her neck put out by the impact, and there's this just, it's all about the negative narcissism and entitlement, and community can just go. And I'm now living in a community that's changing very, very fast, and Melbourne's a city of over 4 million people, and we've had old people die and their properties have been sold, and these old beautiful houses have been knocked down, and then there's just wall to wall like mausoleums being built right up to the fence lines, and no earth, so no trees, and the water doesn't seep down, and it really changes everything. But I still find that when I go for a walk each day, I meet some of the old people, and we just learn all this wonderful wisdom of the earth. Just sometimes it'll take me, what should be a 5-minute walk to the post office might take me an hour with meeting people, and I factor that into my daily life, because I think without the human connections, you can be very technologically savvy and all the rest of it, but without the human connections, you're not being fully nourished. And I just saw on television this week a special program for young people, like adolescents or maybe 19-year-olds who've been addicted to their technology and their online 10 or 12 plus hours a day, and they're having to go to a boot camp where they have to hand in their phones and do other things that involve real relationships and activities. So that's another imbalance. So it's this kind of balance and place in the centre that we probably aim for with our individuation process.
Prior to this, I asked you about the state of the bees today and
Yes.
what that says about us as a society. And you had recommended that I look at what you had said about the weeds in your book, and where does wilderness and wildness of nature and our own human nature fit into that?
Yes.
Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, it kind of links in with the transform Berserker thing, but I loved it in Switzerland because in springtime, they don't cut down their grass with their, American Beauty type of red, pink gloves on. They let all the weeds or the wild things and the bluebells, and primroses come up, and the bees just love that, and it helps strengthen the bees. And there's diversity. It's not monoculture, it's wildness, and I think that gives the bees nutrients and if we just globalize and make everything monocultural and bland for big dollars or big pharma or whatever, then we lose some of that richness from the diversity and the wildness. And some of the researchers with colony collapse disorder, which became visible in 2006, it became a headline in 2006 when the honeybee genome was also published as well. And I had already started my work on the bees and was nearly finished at this particular manuscript. And then that happened. And that, I think I said I might have deleted it, but I think it's in there, that it really pulled me up, because I had the view of the bees as this miraculous, wonderful, self-regulatory, and that they were indestructible in a way, and what a marvellous thing this honey was, and their life. And then this other mystery came in, and this other mystery is probably to do with imbalances of overwork. Have you seen that wonderful, it was a Swiss man from Winterthur who made it, More Than Honey, the film? Did you see that?
No, I haven't.
It's highly recommended. It came out probably in about 2010. I'm not certain about the date. But the almond orchards in California are cited as, bees are often put onto orchards, hives of bees, to help pollinate. And some beekeepers, the modern ones, are wearing T-shirts with, such and such pollination services. Now, the whole thing about keeping beehives in the past was very much a hobbyist, pay attention to the bees in a sacred, mindful way. They had this draping of the beehive with black crepe, the fabric, when the beekeeper died, and this ritual of the telling of the bees, that the survivors of the beekeeper's family would go to the bees and say, "Little bees, your master has died. Will you be happy to work for us and, have a relationship with us now that your master, I say that you can't really own bees because they've got this innate wildness, but the big commercial apiarists, particularly in the States, really have thousands of hives, and this film shows it very well. And they go to the orchards, and we need the almonds, and we love eating almonds. It all happens there, but that's monoculture. There's no weeds because pesticides take care of that. We don't want the weeds in the almond orchards, do we? If it's a commercial unit, we'll go through and we'll spray the pesticides. Doesn't matter whether there's a couple of thousand bee boxes there. And even when colony collapse first happened, Australia doesn't have it because we've really got strict quarantine laws. Some people might remember the awful things when you're flying into Australia. They used to spray the cabin of the aircraft with insecticide. That doesn't happen now, but we have strict quarantine laws about bringing food in. And when I graduated from Switzerland as an analyst, they gave me lots of presents of honey, and I had to quietly give those away to friends, even though I would have loved to have brought them. We don't have colony collapse disorder here. We don't have Varroa constrictor mite, which is one of the gremlins in lowering the bees' immune systems. But they shipped a lot of our healthy bees to California and kept them in a holding warehouse in the heat without water and sunlight unnaturally. Then, it takes the journey from Melbourne to LA is a 16-hour flight. It's horrid. Then they have to unload them, and then they put them out on the orchards and expected them to produce miracles, and a lot died. And some of the commercial recipients are saying, oh, well, the deal wasn't done, we'll have commercial redress and sue you or something like that. Bees are creatures that need to be oriented, and I say in the book, even if you have a beehive in your home garden and you move it to, say, several yards or metres across the other side of the garden, you will find at that original site that there's a pile of dead bees because they fly back to the exact precise place. They've got this amazing orientation instinct. And if they're being packed up on trucks, put there as pollinators in these big orchards for 2 or 3 weeks, and they want the commercial almond producers want the job done quickly, then there'll be all these different bees, and then they'll be loaded back up on these trucks and carried right across America. They won't get enough rest. They won't get enough multivitamins, if you like. And they, like humans, get immune deficiencies and suffer. There's a whole lot of, we haven't been able with our conscious science to say this is the cause of that. But it is one of those things, I think, of burnout and a lack of inner reflection. And the people in Illinois say that the hobbyists in your part of the world who have a few hives, those hives are fine because they're cared for and nourished with different variety like the weeds. And it's not just, this monoculture that's sprayed. Pesticides are another thing. There's been a lot of illegal action and some good things just recently in the States that people can look up. I can't rattle off the exact details at the moment, but there's the Einstein quote about if the bees die, then human life has got 4 years to go. That's because they pollinate the fruits and flowers and a lot of our food chain. But they're also like frogs, the canary in the mine. If bees are dying, then there's really something wrong with the balance of our ecosystem, and we need to pay attention. A lot more people know about bees and their mystery and have, New York's got urban hives on the rooftops, so is Melbourne, and there's all these boutique honey tastings and things like that. That's all right, but there's still these big commercial units that have to happen, and probably a more mindful, conscious, sacred approach is out of the question, but hopefully that berserker might be transformed a bit. There's some wonderful brand new research that a colleague sent me just recently saying that like in China, because the bees have died, they've been using little paintbrushes and pollinating the fruit trees by hand. How bad's that when, natural insects and have been doing it for millennium? But apparently there's a difference between human pollinated fruits and bee and insect pollinated fruits, that vitamin A and iron and folate are just really down in the artificially pollinated things. So, the mystery of nature, the web of life, is what Jung would call numinous. We can't get to the bottom of it, and we just have to respect. Carl von Frisch, the person who was famous for and won the Nobel Prize in 1973 for his work on the dance language and orientation of bees, says the life of the bee is like a magic well. The more you draw from it, the more there is to draw. And then there's this amazing book that's online by Maurice Maeterlinck, The Life of the Bee, written at the very beginning of the 20th century, 1901. He says, the first time we open a hive, there comes over us an emotion like that we might feel at profaning some unknown object, charged perhaps with dreadful surprise. So there's this sense that you have to actually respect the mystery of this marvellous little honey maker, just like we have to respect the mystery of our own depths. And Shakespeare's another quote. I love some of these quotes about bees, and there's a lot of them. He wrote that the person is not worthy of the honeycomb if they shun the hives because the bees have stings. And every beekeeper has to deal with the stinging part, but a lot of bees, they don't sting certain people. I mean, if you wear strong perfumes or look like a bear or something like that, it can happen. And I have a dear colleague who's a training analyst in Zurich who got stung all over the face and beard by bees and had to go to hospital. But now the bees treat him as one of theirs. And same thing seems to happen with other elements of the natural world. Nature is full of surprises and mysteries that we need to respect. And Carl Jung really did respect that. He said that he was part of a natural being, and people loved that about him, that, you know, and he had the place at Bollingen and cooked over an open fire. And, you know, he just said, as I said before, the main interest of my work is not concerned with the treatment of neurosis or the problems of the neurotic daily life, but rather with the approach to the numinous, which is a real therapy. And it actually is, Franz says this in her book, The Cat, which is beautiful, that it's the archetypal, that kind of numinous core, that's where the healing actually comes from. If you have a dream, like the dream that launched me on my path to Zurich, I suppose, although I didn't know it till years later, it takes you to something deeper with a meaning beyond the personal, which connects you in with fellow human beings, and that kind of takes us out of our selfish, unrelated pursuits, I think. So it's something that we can take from this, I think, is that each day, if we go out into our lives, like the bees go out to the different foraging areas, like the flowers, that we bring back, and they bring back aphid droppings and nectar and so on, and then they put it in the little vats, the hexagons in the hives, and they then start their alchemical transforming process. So we have to bring back what shit, I suppose, and grist for the mill that we get in our daily life, and the beautiful things and the delicious honeys, and sit with it and have the right measure of heat. The bees' right measure of heat is the same as our human body temperature, which is amazing, and keep it cool enough, but they flap their wings. We take time out and try and balance things and eat our meals and have our sleep and tend our own health, and that can be transformed into something that's of enduring value, like the golden honey that doesn't perish. It lasts for centuries, honey. But just to finish, Laura, the Rilke quote I think's most important for bringing it back to an everyday thing. We're the bees of the invisible world. We perpetually gather the honey of the visible world in order to store it in the great golden hive of the invisible one. He was a writer, and, you know, a lot of writers say that you have to show up at your desk every day and then it will flow. But if you don't show up at your desk and sit there and agonise, even if you only write a few words, then, you know, I think Daryl says, you know, do what's in front of you, stare at the wall until it happens. There was a lovely thing on Inner City Books Facebook page about that recently. So Daryl's been bringing the honey to us with the Inner City Books, and there's no publishing house like that still. And so I thank you, and I thank Daryl and Inner City Books.
Well, thank you, Frith. Thank you for this wonderful book, for opening my eyes to something that was there all along and I just had never noticed. I encourage everybody to get a copy because there's so much more in there that we just didn't have time to cover today. So much of alchemy and Jung and tying all of this symbolism together. And I'll never look at nature or bees or honey the same after this. So for that, I thank you, Frith.
Thanks, Laura. And I must say that when I've lectured on this topic, and check my website, frithluton.com, because I talk about there's a bit more information under the lectures and publications about the bees, and I'm adding some more material about the bees, and Laura will be too.
Thank you, Frith.
Thank you, Laura.
I'd like to say another big thank you to Frith for her time today. please visit her website, frithluton.com. That's FRITHLUTON, where you'll find an extensive section on her lectures and publications, including a beautiful page about her lectures on bees, honey, and the hive. And please visit the website speakingofjung.com for more information about this podcast, as well as links to the books that were mentioned today. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes and on Stitcher. So with eternal gratitude to Liz Jefferson, Daryl Sharp, Charlie Arthur, and Diane Braden, this is Laura London, and you've been listening to Speaking of Jung.